Marinaro, the Sick Podcast. And with the Canadiens battling the Leafs in the playoffs, not really battling, Toronto's making it look easy. They're up 3-1 after 4. What do? I go straight to Toronto and I bring in former Toronto Maple Leaf himself and current co-host on TSN 1050 in Toronto, Carlo Colaiacovo. How you doing, bud?
I'm doing way better than you today, Tony.
You're right about that. Hey, let me ask you, once a Leaf, always a Leaf?
Yes, for sure. I mean, it all depends on, for me, the amount of time that you get to spend with the organization and the fact that Toronto was the team that baptized me into the NHL, spending almost 5 years there. And now allowing me to set myself up post-career here in Toronto, being part of the Maple Leafs alumni. Once a Leaf, always a Leaf for me.
All right. Did you think it was going to be this easy? Because I'm watching this series, and for me, it looks like Toronto's playing with Montreal. And I know they lost the first game. I was talking to a buddy of mine last night who said to me, he says, you know what? I'm not so sure Montreal won last game. He says, I have more of a feeling that Toronto just lost it because they were shocked with their captain going down. But once they were able to reset for the next game, Carlo, it looks like the Canadiens don't even belong on the same sheet of ice as Toronto. Toronto's that much better. Did you think that going in?
Tony, I obviously believe that Toronto was the better team and was probably going to come out the victors in this series, but I thought it was going to be a lot closer than what we've seen after 4 games. I think I agree with you in game 1. There was a lot of emotions that went through that game, and even though the Montreal Canadiens did get the better of the bounces in that game, Toronto exerted a lot of energy. And I think the best thing that could have happened to Toronto after that game was a day off to regroup. Because if you think the way these last 2 games have transpired when on a back-to-back night, you think about whether or not the team would have been able to respond in the way that they played in game 4, which I thought was the most dominant effort by the Maple Leafs team, who was missing 2 of their top 6 forwards, surprisingly, in Tavares and Foligno. But I'm not surprised with this group, with what you're seeing with the Toronto Maple Leafs, because this team all season has shown that they are a different team. They are comfortable in playing in close games. They are comfortable playing a style of game that can be a little bit more physical, a little bit more rough and tough. But I'm also impressed with the way they have other guys stepping up. I mean, you and I both know at this time of the year, your stars are going to get you to this point. But come playoff time, it's always your bottom 6 guys that find a way to be a difference for you. And I think right now, Toronto's getting way more out of their bottom 6 than Montreal can even imagine. I mean, you think about the lack of scoring production that they're getting from their whole forward group. Yeah. And I think where Montreal messed up, and I think I talked to you a little bit about this early on before the season started. I didn't like the decision Dominic Ducharme made about sitting your 3 young guys come playoff time, Caulfield, Kotkaniemi, and Romanov. If you look at the last 3 weeks of the season when they had to play without Weber, without Gallagher, without Tatar, it was the spark of those young players.
Danault was hurt.
It was the spark that those young players gave this group.
Drouin was out
to help them clinch a playoff spot. And when you immediately change the feeling of this group come game 1 of the playoffs, you lose the room. And I think Montreal just hasn't been able to respond from it.
I'm Marinaro. He's Colaiacovo. It's the Sick Podcast. The show is brought to you by Essentia, the world's only natural memory foam mattress. Go to myessentia.com/sickpod and see why Essentia is the mattress of choice for many athletes, including over 25% of professional hockey players. Use code SICKPOD for a free pillow with your purchase of Essentia Beyond Organic Sleep. All right, okay. Speaking of sleep, right now. I have to get you one. Speaking of sleep, it seems like the Canadiens, for whatever reason, are just asleep in this series. I haven't seen, and for me, Carlo, that's the thing that bothers me the most. Losing is one thing. At the end of the day, one team will win and one team will lose. But the fact that we're seeing so very little emotion from the Canadiens, I mean, in game 3, Shea Weber wiped Austin Matthews' face for about 15 seconds, and it ended there. You're not seeing a big hit. You're not seeing anything to change the momentum. You're not seeing anyone go crazy. It almost seems like they're a team that doesn't believe So they're just playing to almost get it over with. And that, for me, is the most disappointing.
I think it has to be disappointing, Tony, especially with the effort that you saw them play with in game one, where they established a physical game and they made it known that this was going to be a tough and physical series for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And you just didn't see that same response in game two, game three, or even game four. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason for that is because when you struggle to score goals, you start to lose your focus in the game, because now in playoff time, if you're not scoring more than 1-2 goals a game, there's a good chance you're not going to win games. And we've seen the struggles that Montreal has had in this series scoring goals. They haven't showed it. 1 goal in game 2, 1 goal in game 3, 0 goals in game 4. And I think when you have those struggles, immediately you start to lose focus on the other things that made you, or that helped you win game 1. Because now you're feeling the pressure of, especially if you're a top guy, you're not producing, you're not helping the team win. And I just think right now, you talked about all the question marks going into the series. Could Carey Price be Carey Price? Well, I think you can agree Carey Price has been Carey Price from those series. He's allowed them a chance to stay in the games, allowed them a chance to win games, but ultimately they're just not getting it done offensively with any of their top guys. I don't know how healthy some of the guys on their defense are, but clearly that's no excuse at this time of the season. But if Montreal has any hope of coming back into this series, they have to be emotionally invested into this. And quite frankly, after 4 games, I just don't see it in them.
All right. A shout out to Excellent Photos, centrally located close to downtown shopping and universities, ships to all of Canada, professional staff at the store and online to help you choose the gear you really need. If the Canadiens are going to come back, this Toronto team, paint a picture as to how the Canadiens can beat this Toronto team. Is it impossible for you, or can you actually see them coming back from down 3-1?
Well, you said paint a picture. Maybe this is the picture they need to start painting, where they start getting physical with guys up against the glass. I honestly don't see it, Tony. I know the motivation is there for Montreal. Game 6, there's going to be fans in the building, and the players want to get there just so that they can feel that feeling. But you talk about what we've seen in these last 2 games. They just don't seem, the energy doesn't seem there. The emotion doesn't seem there. I think that the style of play doesn't seem there, because as much as it looks like they're creating, some dysfunction in the Toronto's D zone, they're not really creating much towards the net. They're not making life difficult on Jack Campbell, who is a guy who's had a great year and a guy who's playing in his first playoff. So, maybe they could sneak in another game, but to win 3 out of the next 4 against the Maple Leafs team that has completely dominated them all year, I just can't see it happening.
If you go to sportbuffshop.com for all of your officially licensed sports apparel and more, use code SICK15 for 15% off on all of their items, and that might include a Toronto Maple Leaf hoodie. All right, I'll talk to you about Campbell in a second. You talked about playing the young guys. Kotkaniemi got in game 2, game 3, and game 4. Caulfield came in game 3 and game 4. Romanov has yet to play a game. It's funny because they went to Russia last year to convince him to come over, to burn a year of his entry level. We were told that he could play in the National Hockey League. At that point, they thought he was that good. He would have played had he been eligible, but he wasn't. So he watched to learn. 1 year later, he plays the entire regular season, and now he's still watching to learn. I don't get it. And if anything, even if you don't trust the guy, shouldn't he have been playing game 4 when you're playing 3 games in 4 nights and clearly you need some energy in your lineup, Carlo?
Just look at the injection of energy a guy like Cole Caulfield injected into this team when he made his debut and started playing games in the regular season. I love Romanov as a player. This is a guy that can create offense. He can skate. He plays a physical game. He plays, he plays with jam. And ultimately, you look at their bottom pairing. I think Romanov can bring more than what Kulak and what Merrill are bringing. Yes, they play a steady game, but this is a Montreal Canadiens team that is having a hard time scoring goals. And if you want to, make it a close series against the Toronto Maple Leafs, you've got to infiltrate or at least create a physical game. That's something Romanov brings. Now, I get it. He's, maybe game 1, I can understand it because, you're trying to focus on more of a slowing the game down and trying to eliminate the mistakes that a young player could make. But all you got to do is look at what the Maple Leafs did with Rasmus Sandin.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the same situation. A guy who didn't even play most of the regular season, but they put him into the lineup because it represented, or at least it gave the Maple Leafs the best opportunity to put the best 6 players that were playing the best hockey at this time of year. And look at the decision they made in Game 4. Okay, he's a young guy. Don't want to put him in a back-to-back situation. We'll put in Travis Dermott. Look at the spark Travis Dermott created. A guy with fresh legs, fresh energy, fresh motivation came in and played a solid game. I mean, if you're talking about building this team and trying to have success right now, Romanov has to be part of the solution here. And I just don't understand why he's not in there. I mean, you've got a guy who's probably, chomping at the bit right now to get in there. And the team that's scoring 1 goal a game, you can think that Romanov can add a little bit more to that based on, his offensive capabilities. So I don't understand it. I don't even know if it changes right now because now you're desperate and you can't afford to lose another game. And I heard Ducharme's comments saying that he feels good about the team because they're not giving up much. Well, regardless if you're giving up much, you're down 3-1 in this series. So it's your job as a coach right now to do something with the decisions you make on this roster to try to change the energy in this group.
It's the Sick Podcast. I'm Marinaro. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at the Sick Podcast. And of course, the Sick Podcast is brought to you by Essentia, the world's only natural memory foam mattress. All right, okay. So it's mind-boggling too because a couple of years ago there was a revamp, there was a reset, and you figured that they were going to get the young kids in, so they were going to be able to gain valuable experience. I mean, here they are, they're losing. And if you're going to lose, you should lose with your young guys, right? To get them this experience like that. Next time they get there, they're going to know what it feels like.
You always got to learn from your past experiences. And for this Montreal Canadiens team, I think last year's experience in the bubble was a learning experience for them, especially their young players, because the reason why Marc Bergevin went out in the offseason and did what they did is because they saw the growth in their young players. Now, regardless of what happens this series, you want to focus on who's going to be around next year. You can't imagine John Merrill's going to be around next year. You can't imagine Brett Kulak's going to be around next year. You got to imagine Romanov's going to be a big part of this future. And I just don't understand why they don't see the same importance of playing him in this round to gain that valuable experience. I mean, can you think of a situation where the Montreal Canadiens get eliminated in 5 games and Romanov didn't play 1 playoff game? How does that help, his development or his progression into next year's season? It doesn't.
I'm going to take it a step further. Think about this. The Montreal Canadiens played the Toronto Maple Leafs, who in game 1 lost their captain, their second-line centerman, a guy who's a valuable piece on the power play for a team that's known as a team that's a top 2-line kind of team, an offensive team. And then Nick Foligno goes down with an injury as well. The guy who was going to take Tavares' spot playing center on that line, Kerfoot gets bumped up. I mean, the Canadiens so far through 4 games have limited Matthews to 3 points, Marner to 3 points, and they're losing 3 games to 1. And in game 2 and 4, they didn't touch the puck.
Yeah. That's a tough one to swallow. I totally agree with you. But as I stated earlier, that's what wins at this time here. You look at any team that has won the Stanley Cup. Yes, your top players carry you because they have to. But it's the role and the production that you get from your bottom 6 players that ultimately define whether you win a series and how far you go. And right now, Montreal's getting nothing from their bottom 6.
All right, so in Montreal, a lot of people are starting to look at this team. And when Marc Bergevin, the beginning of the season, he said, I'm comfortable with my team. I really like my team because I believe I have a team that can play any way you want to play. Clearly, that hasn't materialized.
Yeah.
When you take a look at the way this team was built, the acquisitions, everyone looked at this team a year ago, Carlo. Beat the Penguins in the play-in. Were competitive against the Flyers. Yes, they were shut out 2 games in a row, but they were competitive, won 6 games. They added to that Jake Allen, Joel Edmondson, Corey Perry, Eric Stahl, Josh Anderson, Tyler Toffoli. They brought in Romanov. They brought in Cole Caulfield. Everyone thought, well, this team should take 2 steps forward. They don't look like they have. They actually look worse. What does that tell you? Like, what do you think of the construction of the Canadiens?
Well, Tony, I'll be the first one to admit that I thought Montreal won the offseason early on in the season with the way they came out and established themselves as a top team in the league. I really loved all the additions you just mentioned. But as the season carried on, I think they lost their identity. And could that have been with the coaching change and not having enough practice time? Possibly. I mean, I heard over the last 43 days where they played 25 games in 43 days, probably the toughest schedule of all teams remaining. You can see they lacked energy. They only had 4 practices as a team during those 43 days. And with a new coach coming in, sometimes that can be difficult if you're trying to get the guys to play a certain way and buy into a different philosophy. But what you're also trying to build during that time is chemistry, which is what you're not seeing enough of, throughout their 4 lines. So have I seen enough? I like the additions the Montreal Canadiens did because they plugged certain weaknesses in their lineup. But what I think becomes a really successful team is when you have guys that understand what their role is on their team. And I just think you have too many guys right now in Montreal because they've been moved up and down the lineup that don't know what their role is on this team. And you see the confusion. And that starts with the coach too. And you can't blame them for – and I'm not trying to make excuses for Montreal. And I can't make excuses for the players that have had to go through this grind of a season. Because it's never been done before. But clearly it's had an impact on their play, their philosophy, and their production.
All right. I like asking this question to people outside of Montreal because in Montreal, everyone's just so invested in it, right? But from the outside, and you're in Toronto, a lot of people in Montreal are wondering about the future for Dominic Ducharme, who's got the interim tag, and Marc Bergevin, who next year will be in the final year of his contract. Bergevin's already been on the job for 9 years. So if he sticks around for one more, that'll be 10. From the outside, from Toronto, based on what you've seen, Dominic Ducharme, who has a lot more losses than he has wins since taking over, but you talked about how difficult the schedule was, to be fair. Would you bring him back?
Yes, I would bring back both Dominic Ducharme and Marc Bergevin because I think the goal this offseason was for Montreal to be a playoff team, which ended up being. And you need to give this transition a full season to let itself play out because what's there to lose? You got Marc Bergevin with 1 year left on his contract. You've given Dominic Ducharme half of a season to see if he can actually be a full-time NHL coach. You talk about all the things that the players went through, playing in front of no fans, having to deal with the daily protocols, the injuries that they've gone through, not playing a full season with Carey Price not even playing right up until – there's a lot of things that factor in. And I think when you measure up the success after the season, you lost to a better team. And, if the series goes Toronto's way, if they end up winning, you lost to a better team. And I think where the attention needs to be focused on this team is what do they do in the offseason with another year of the younger players gaining experience. I think the first 10, 20 games of next season are going to be the most crucial point in Marc Bergevin's tenure and even Dominic Ducharme. But if as an outsider looking in, I think you've got to give this process the real transition that it needs to play itself out.
So
they have good
Carlo
players. Montreal has good players, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's any denying that, but it's been a tough year.
He's Carlo Colaiacovo, former NHL player, former Toronto Maple Leaf, and now with TSN 1050 in Toronto. I want you to be Marc Bergevin for the next minute or so, though. I want you to be him. Thomas Tatar is an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. He makes $4.8 million on the cap. He's a 30-year-old winger. What do you do?
I think you've got to find a way to replace him because clearly during his time here, yes, he's been productive, but he hasn't gotten you to the next level. I mean, you're talking about healthy scratch at a guy in a playoff game. To me, that's a signal of moving on from a player. And what do you have in the system? I don't know what Laval, what the players have or what the Montreal Canadiens have in the system, but I know one player that they definitely need to find a lineup spot for next year, and that's Cole Caulfield.
Okay.
Right. So, you use that money that you're going to pay him to see what's out there on the free agent market. I mean, I think they won the free agent market sweepstakes last year by getting a guy like Toffoli, and you saw the production he was able to bring. But I think it's clear and evident that you cannot depend on Nick Suzuki and Kasperi Kotkaniemi to be your 1-2 center iceman next year if you plan on being a playoff team. Because if they go back to the old division, let me remind you who you're playing against: Tampa Bay, Boston, Florida, Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa. Like, you talk about the growth that Ottawa's taking this year. I think it's safe to say if there was a week or 2 weeks left in the season, there might have been a potential that Ottawa catches Montreal for that last playoff spot.
There was a report in Montreal early on in the season or before the season started that Phil Deneau refused a 6-year, $30 million contract offer. So if he wants $5 million a year, based on what you've seen, you're Marc Bergevin now, what do you do with him?
I still shake my head at that report, and if it was true, how he walked away from that. Because you look at the landscape of the NHL, flat cap, how a player gets that advice from his agent, considering the situation that he's in, the role that he's being asked to play. And I thought that was more than enough market value for Phillip Deneau. You cannot pay him that. You can't, based on the play that you saw from him this year. Yeah, I know you use him as your shutdown forward, but with a flat cap, you can't be overpaying guys that you think are going to be good. You need guys that you're going to be paying that money to produce. And I really don't think that market is there for Phillip Deneau at that same contract. Mm-hmm. But Phillip Deneau is a really, really good player, a really good role player that you should find a way to keep around that works both for him and the team moving forward. And
I say
because I don't look at Phillip Deneau as a top 2 center iceman on any team. He's a perfect third line center iceman, and
I agree with you.
I think that's the best he can be.
And for the most part, there are exceptions, by the way. For the most part, you don't pay third liners more than $4 million, correct?
I would even say $3.5 million. I mean, the Maple Leafs are paying Alex Kerfoot $3.5 million. Look at the production you're getting out of him right now.
This is going to be a touchy one because he's still under contract for the next 5 years. But in a couple of months, Shea Weber turns 36. The Montreal Canadiens power play is not what they want it to be. He is declining. He has lost a step. And he will make $7.857 million on the cap for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
You're Marc Bergevin. Do you move your captain at the end of the season?
I think you have to explore all options. I mean, listen, I think we both know who Shea Weber is, what he represents, how he plays. But clearly, as you said, he's on the decline. And he's battled through a lot this year just to get back into the lineup. I don't know what it is, a foot, a hand. If he's fully recovered from his foot injury, you hear rumors of that too. But I think it's safe to say that
if I can, Carlo, a lingering foot injury from a year ago, and these playoffs, he is playing with a brace on his left hand.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's safe to say the leader of this blue line is going to be Jeff Petrie, because he's a guy that can carry the load both offensively and defensively. But, these are the tough decisions that you have to make and start having with your guys on your team that are aging, especially in a flat cap world. And I think it's in Marc Bergevin's best interest to explore that. And ultimately, you've got to find a solution that works both for the player and for Marc Bergevin to either have him come back or find a way to move on.
Brendan Gallagher turns 30 next year. Now, I know 30 is not old, but the way Gallagher plays, a lot of people believe that the actual mileage age or real age is more like 33 instead of a guy who's going to be 30. How concerned would you be if you're a Canadiens fan that Brendan Gallagher next year will start a 6-year deal at $6.5 million per season?
Well, I don't think that contract will ever live up to the value of the contract. Like I don't think he'll produce like a $6.5 million player. And if you can accept that, then you'll be okay with it, because you'll appreciate the other intangibles that he brings. The way he plays with his heart on his sleeve, the way he competes every night, the leadership that he brings both on and off the ice. If you can appreciate that and understand that's what you're going to get from him, then I don't have a problem with the contract. And it's sort of the same thing that I've tried to make Maple Leafs fans understand this year with John Tavares.
Yeah.
John Tavares struggled at the beginning of the year, and everyone's saying, "Oh, I can't believe we paid this guy $11 million." Well, you know what? He's not gonna produce like an $11 million player on this team ever again, because he's passed this organization has handed the reins to Austin Matthews.
Correct.
And if you can accept him for being a solid second line player that brings you the other intangibles, that's who he's going to be moving forward, as long as Austin Matthews continues to be that guy. And listen, yeah, okay, that price tag will never meet his production, but that was the price to get him here when they got him here. So, and look what it's done.
Carlo, if he helps deliver a Stanley Cup, it's worth it. If he doesn't, then you say they probably should have passed. That's it.
100%. But even if he doesn't bring a Stanley Cup, which I hope I get the chance to see, look at the other ways he's helped impact this group and this young team that has developed into a contender. So I look at Brendan Gallagher that same way. I think he's a guy that every team would want on their team because of the way he plays and the intangibles that he brings. So as long, and listen, it's so gut-wrenching to see the injuries that this guy suffers every year, because it's not intentional. It's all fluke, and it's all because he's playing the game the hard way, going into the hard areas of the ice.
Yeah.
You just hope that he can find a way to persevere through that and be healthy and stay healthy and be a guy that can lead you along the way. But again, he needs help. They need to find help for him.
All right, now back to Toronto for a second. He's Carlo Colaiacovo. I'm Tony Marinaro. It's the Sick Podcast. You can place your bets on MyBookie. Go to mybookie.ag/the Sick Podcast and use code SickPicks for a 50% deposit bonus. Bet, win, get paid. All right. Are you guys in Toronto, and I don't know if it's you, by the way, and it's probably not, but are Torontonians and Maple Leafs fans finally going to leave William Nylander alone, or what?
They should. They should. And I'll be the first to admit that I've been one of the critics of William Nylander, not because I don't like him as a player. I think he's a very, very talented player. I just want to see him compete like he is more consistently. And I think that's
Carlo, you played the game. You know this. There's some guys sometimes you have to close your eyes at certain things if they can deliver.
100%
points,
Tony.
right?
I think Phil Kessel is the perfect example.
Correct.
Right? You just sometimes you just got to leave guys alone and let them play. And the frustrations with William Nylander over the last couple of years is, I think that contract negotiation has still left a bad taste in people's mouth because of the way it dragged out.
Yeah.
And in this market, when things become public like that, and then you don't meet the expectations behind it in your first two seasons, you can understand why people feel the same way about the player. But I give William Nylander a ton of credit, because this is a guy that has faced those critics face on, and now has shown them that he's a guy, that you can count on to. I know it's only a short span, but that short span has helped lead this Maple Leafs team to a 3-1 series lead, and mostly because he's contributing, he's being productive, which is what you need to be at this time of year, regardless of how you do it. And you can see that competitive edge in him, which is, what everybody has been waiting for him to play like, because obviously if you can add that to his game of the skill level that's there with his game, he can be an unstoppable player, which is, why at sometimes he frustrates people. But credit to him, in a time the Maple Leafs have needed him the most.
Yeah.
Where two of his line mates, Nick Foligno and John Tavares, have not played for most of the series, he has stepped up in a big way.
It's incredible. You're in Toronto. I'm in Montreal. A couple of years ago, Mike Babcock coached the Toronto Maple Leafs. 3 or 4 months ago, Claude Julien coached the Montreal Canadiens. And now it's Sheldon Keefe and it's Dominic Ducharme.
Yeah.
Does Mike Babcock ever coach again in the National Hockey League, in your opinion?
I think he does. I just don't think it's anytime soon.
And Claude Julien?
I think Claude Julien for sure. I think the way he left and the respect that he has around the league, he hasn't really had to fix his image the same way Mike Babcock has, because of all the things that have leaked about him. And we're seeing the game change, right? We're seeing the game change in the sense that these older generation, these older style coaches are passing the baton, or are passing the torches to these younger, more I would say better communicators in the game, because ultimately that's what being a successful head coach in the NHL in today's game is all about. It's not about X's and O's. It's about how you relate and communicate to your players, because ultimately it's your players that are going to save your job or they're going to get you fired. Because if you don't have that connection with them where you're on the same level of communication or same level of respect, you just don't last very long. And I think that's where, guys like Babcock and guys like Julien, who grew up in that sort of older generation of hockey, are finding themselves a harder path to get back in. And ultimately, I think those two coaches are best. And you can even include John Tortorella into this, because I ultimately believe John Tortorella will find his way back into a game. I don't think those guys are coaches you hire in the offseason and create a 4-year plan. I think those are coaches that come in with a struggling, underachieving team midway through the season that can help change the message and get those teams over the top.
Is it over in Game 5?
Yes, I believe it is.
What
you want me to elaborate, or?
No, you don't have to. I've heard enough.
I just think, look, I mean, you look at the way the Jack Campbell and the confidence he's playing with.
Yeah.
You look at how much momentum Toronto has gained. You look at the inspiration they're playing with. You see these videos of them coming off the ice and they're FaceTiming with their captain. That goes a long way.
Wow.
To create team bonding with a group.
Wow.
Right? And you're hearing these players come out in their media interviews and saying that John Tavares sends a group text message right before a game to give some, words of inspiration and motivation. I just think there's a lot of good going on right now with this Maple Leafs team. Good vibes, which is what you need at this time of year, and good luck. That it's really, really hard for me to think that Montreal can muster up anything to score at least 3 goals to win a game. And that's in this series, that's what you're going to need to win. Because if you don't, I mean, I think it's safe to say they got lucky in Game 1.
Yeah.
Because Carey Price made a couple of big saves and he did what he needed to do to steal a game. But since then, I mean, Montreal has not been a threat at all offensively.
Carlo, you have to say, based on what we've seen, everything points to Toronto, so I'd have to agree with you on that one. Thanks for doing this, man. He's Carlo Colaiacovo. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, bud. Anything for you, man.
It was fun. It's the Sick Podcast. I'm Marinero, and you can follow us on YouTube and podcast platforms and Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at the Sick Podcast. Until next time.